This is the third reel of Mike Grieves' cine films shot in Southern Africa, and I'm very pleased to say that we're joined by Mike from his home in Germany.
Now, this is the third version of my South Africa trip at the end of August 1972. It concerns the line Graaff Reinet to Rosmead and also Dayar to Kimberley. Now, this route was a secondary route. It was a through route from the Indian Ocean coast at Mossel Bay up to Johannesburg and Pretoria, and it was very mountainous in parts, and it was the home of the very attractive 19B class 482s, which there were only 14 of them, 1401 to 1414. And the only passenger train on this route, advertised in the passenger timetable, was the Mossel Bay Express, which was a long-distance train. But there were a number of freight trains, one of which was the 0830 from Rosmead to Graaff Reinet, which it said in the timetable, passengers are accommodated on this goods train when run. Well, this goods train ran virtually every day, and it was quite a long goods train, and it paralleled the N9 main road between Middelburg and Graaff Reinet and onto the coast. Now, here we are just on the outskirts of Middelburg. This is where we had stayed the night after our 380-kilometre drive from Lurry in the Cape region. And this is the next day with 219Bs heading up the Lootsberg Pass. Now, the Lootsberg Pass was something of a very enjoyable railway route to follow by car. There was a great height difference between Rosmead and the summit of the pass, and it was easy to follow the train with our hired car.
Mike, do you know roughly what the grade was on this line?
I don't know what the grade is, but it's a difference in height of 900 meters between Middelburg and the actual summit. My guess is that it's about it's fairly flat at the beginning, but then it's the last 13 kilometers to the pass summit where it really gets steep, something to the order of 1 in 50, I would think. The difference in height is actually shown in the passenger timetable, and every distance and altitude is given in meters in the South African Railway timetable of 51 years ago. And I note here that it's between Rosmead and the summit 995 meters over a distance of about 60 kilometers. Now, one of the returning trains was not in the timetable. This was a train which came from Graaff Reinet. It must have left in the middle of the night, also with a 19B heading up to Rosmead. Rosmead was a railway junction of no great consequence. It was the junction of 4 lines, and it was on the main line from Port Elizabeth to Johannesburg. And Middelburg was the only place where there was a hotel.
I see this train had 1 passenger coach behind the engine.
This train had 1 passenger coach. It was not in the timetable, so we didn't know it was coming. And there were quite a lot of freight trains which weren't in the passenger timetable. But I always found the 19Bs the most attractive of the 19s. There were 337 19s in 5 different classifications, and the 19B was built in Germany in 1930 or thereabouts, and there were only 14 of them, and they were all concentrated at Rosmead Depot and Graaff Reinet Depot.
It seems to be going at a fair old speed, Mike.
It's probably going at about 80 kph, yes. Given the gauge is only 3'6". Now, this is leaving Middelburg in the direction of Rosmead. Rosmead to Middelburg was 13 kilometers. travelling by train on secondary lines in South Africa in those days was a track basher's delight, because the accommodation on these secondary trains was quite comfortable. You could occupy a compartment, and generally reckon on getting a compartment to yourself. You could hire a mattress and a pillow and blanket, and you could indeed join the train the previous evening and have a quiet night's sleep, not knowing really when the train would set off. Now, this is the Mossel Bay Express itself. It's left Mossel Bay the previous day at 1:15, had gone through the night, and was leaving Graaff Reinet at 8:43, heading northbound. And this was also a distance of about 100 kilometers from Graaff Reinet to the summit. And it was double-headed. Only ran twice a week, so one had to be choosy about when one visited this region. But as you will see later in the video, it gets steeper and the scenery becomes more barren. It was a fairly slow journey. It didn't get to Rosmead until 14:21. Had a restaurant car with a twin diner, which was a double restaurant car made up of 2 coaches served by a kitchen car. 14 coaches altogether, and I gathered it was mostly used by holiday makers, many of whom might be South African Railways employees on a free pass. Now, this line was closed in 1993. Along with a lot of secondary lines in South Africa, but it was reopened in 2015, but I can't imagine there's a passenger train on this line now. Very windy, as you can see from the smoke drifting across the countryside. On this route, the passenger stock was mostly the older type of passenger stock. There was newer coaches built in the late 1950s, but the passenger stock on this train was generally older stock built in the 1920s. Now, 3333 is a class 19D. There were 235 of these 19Ds, and this is one of the latter batch built in 1948 with an extended, what is called Vanderbilt tender, for operating in areas where water supply was few and far between. They could take on more water when the opportunity arose. Again, this is a freight train which was not in the passenger timetable, therefore we didn't really know it was running.
How did you actually find out the train was running? Was it a matter of going to the engine shed or the station and seeing what was happening?
Well, we generally saw smoke in the distance. We weren't able to stay on the N9 main road all the way. The road to the Lootsberg Pass summit was on a dirt road. We had maps, ordnance survey type maps, in the pre-Google Earth era. Yes, we spent a lot of time waiting for trains to turn up, and when smoke appeared on the horizon, we sort of set up our photo positions. But we spent virtually two whole days here. We arrived on the day of arrival late in the evening, found a hotel without any great problem, and then we set off on day 2 with the 8:30 freight, and spent the whole day in the pass region. And on the day that the Mossel Bay Express ran, we drove, leaving real early from Middelburg to Graaff Reinet to get it leaving Graaff Reinet at 8:35. and headed up the pass again, and left for the Dayar Kimberley line in the afternoon of day 3. Now, this is the second day that we were in Middelburg. This is the 8:30 freight. It invariably ran early, so one wasn't really quite sure what time it would actually leave. And the hotel was very, very cooperative. They served breakfast for us at 10 o'clock in the morning. We've been out on the main line photographing for 3 hours and coming back really hungry for breakfast at 10 o'clock. This is one of my favourite scenes in my whole collection of the parallel running, here we are, of these 2 locomotives. Luck of the draw, what the weather would be, we were very lucky with the weather here.
I assume there wasn't too much traffic on this road, so
no, there was hardly any traffic on the roads. I wouldn't like to hazard a guess what it's like today. It was the law of the land that any freight over 50 kilometres had to be by train, so there wasn't much in the way of lorries.
But unlike chasing a train today by road, you wouldn't have had any other photographers to negotiate on the road whilst you're chasing this train.
No, there were quite a lot of enthusiasts in South Africa. There was indeed in the Johannesburg region, the Railway Society of South Africa. I don't know if they exist today, but there is a website called Soul of a Railway, and I get updates about new chapters. The author, Les Pivnik, I keep in contact with. He's now 86 or 87. And the mailing list for his work is quite long.
Do you know whether the double-headed operation continued right throughout the journey?
The double-headed operation ended in a place called Rooigte, Roohigte, and one of the 2 locomotives then went to the back of the train and acted as a banker to the summit at Lootsberg, and then would have gone light engine back to Rosmead. Because from Lootsberg all the way to Graaff Reinet, it's downhill. Graaff Reinet was a smallish town. I don't know what the population of the town is, maybe less than 10,000, but it was a locomotive depot and a division point. And the Mossel Bay Express came from Mossel Bay via George, Oudtshoorn, through the Tuawater Port Gorge at night time to Kliplaat, and from Kliplaat 5:50 to Graaff Reinet, and in Graaff Reinet there was an hour's layover for locomotive change. They would have taken on supplies for the restaurant cart there. Now this is the 8:30X Rosmead freight on the final 13 kilometres from Rooigte to the summit.
Yeah, so I see the second engine is now assisting at the rear.
It is, yeah. The locomotives had a regular crew, so the locomotives were kept in good spick and span state of affairs. Now this is the south side of the pass. A freight train, short freight train coming from Graaff Reinet. Now this is the line from Rosmead towards Stormberg. This is the only occasion we saw a train on this line. This line had long distance passenger trains, but both of them ran at night time. This line was closed in 2001 and the track lifted. Now we're on a completely different line now. We drove 150 kilometers from Middelburg to Deir. We could have spent the night in Deir. In fact, 2 nights we spent in this region. But our timetable was gauged by the 1540 stopping train, two nights on the go from Cape Town to Johannesburg. And this line was very, very busy with 80 to 100 trains per day. Mostly freight trains, and we just perchanced on a line side location and one came along. This line hosted a number of passenger trains, some of which were long distance from Rhodesia to Cape Town, and the Orange Express from Durban, and the Kraankuil, which did the journey from Johannesburg to Cape Town in 1 night instead of 2 nights for the stopper. And the engines were all kept in good shape. The 25 NC class here, there were 90 altogether. 20 odd were kept in the passenger link. And 50 were condensers and 40 were non-condensers. This part of South Africa is very barren, and also for the section between Deir and Beaufort West, it's almost desert, which is why condensing locomotives found favour here.
Those who are not familiar with the idea, could you briefly explain the idea?
Yes, the steam from the boiler after use was converted back into water by a condensing apparatus. There were 5 propellers on the tender of the 25Cs, which cooled the water and returned it to fluid for reuse. It was a really weird experience hearing a Class 25 condenser approaching, because it wasn't the normal chuff, chuff, chuff of a steam engine. It was just the whine of an aircraft, more or less. But in the late 1970s, all but one of the 25Cs were converted back into 25 non-condensers and look really quite weird with their extended tenders elongated without the condensing apparatus. Not really very attractive. But one class 25C was preserved, number 3511. I don't think it's used all that often in this day and age, though. But we chose not to spend the night in Dayar. Dayar was a big junction with locomotive depot. It was the junction of the line to Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, and there was action day and night there. It would have been an interesting place in the evening hours, but we chose to stay in Kraankuil, and Kraankuil had a hotel right next to the railway line, and it was 88 kilometers from Dayar to Kraankuil. And the road was a dirt road, wasn't tarred, and there were trains coming virtually all the time. And it was dead easy to follow by car. But as you can see, the weather at the beginning is not too good, but it improves later. The distance from Dayar to Kimberley, with no particularly small and with no particularly big towns in between, was 238 kilometers. And 17 stations of no consequence. They existed purely to serve the railway. And I gather the line has now been singled.
It looks as if it's fairly level track along that line.
Yeah, it's fairly level track, although there is a distance in height of 525 meters between Kimberley and Dayar. Now, this is the Orange Express. The Orange Express was a classic long-distance train from Durban to Cape Town. It only stopped once between Kimberley and Dayar at Orange River to take water and clean the fire. The stopping train, which was 2 nights from Johannesburg to Cape Town, took 5¼ hours on this section here, whereas the Orange Express made the distance in 3½.
Do you know if the Orange Express commanded an extra fare for passengers?
I don't think it did, no. It was all reservable, of course. What did command an extra fare was the Blue Train. The Blue Train was a luxury train, really, for overseas tourists, but it was available to anybody. And my wife and I travelled on the Blue Train in 1975. Now, this is the train the reason why we chose to spend the night in Kraankuil rather than Dayar. This is the 1540 hours from Dayar to Kimberley, which took 2 nights from Cape Town to Johannesburg, distance of 1,538 kilometers. And the afternoon light gets better as the afternoon progresses, and this is about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, low sunlight. There was a second hotel on the main line right next to the railway line at Whitput. Whitput is a little bit further on towards Kimberley. And in the late 1980s, there was a video produced, later reissued as a DVD, called Steam Fever, and the Whitput Hotel is to be seen in that DVD. With a lot of entries from visitors from all over the world.
Looks like there was a pretty constant parade of trains.
Yes, it was. There was no need to find out what time trains ran. We knew what time the passenger trains ran, but freight trains were like every 20 minutes. Now, this is a Class 23. There were 136 of these Class 23s. They were built in Germany in 1938-39, whereas the 25Cs and NCs were built by Henschel and North British in Glasgow in 1953-54. And at the end of August, that's the early spring in South Africa, it was light until about 7 o'clock. So we made good use of the late afternoon sunlight. But there were hardly any tourists here, and we didn't meet any other railway enthusiasts, and we got our accommodation in Kraankuil without any pre-booking. And one could see a train coming from miles away. I revisited this line with two other friends in 1973, and later on in section 5 or 6, hopefully we can see them on YouTube, just like here. Now this is the depot at DR for light engines. They're heading up the incline to the coal stage where locomotives were serviced. Here's the station pilot, one of two. Constant shunting going on here day and night. Now this is one of the so-called liner trains, 4 Class 34 diesels. These ran from Hotterzeel, which is a short take for hot as hell, 350 kilometers north of Kimberley on the edge of the Kalahari Desert. And in the 1990s, an electrified line was built from this Hotterzeel to the coast just north of Cape Town. But they were diesel hauled with over 100 wagons in 1972. The Class 34 diesels I find quite attractive, and they're still in service. I don't suppose all of them are still in service.
Did you say this line had been singled?
Yeah, it has been singled. I have fairly up to date.
Is it electrified, do you think?
Yes, it's electrified as well. And all the minor stations don't exist any longer. They might exist as service centres, but they're not in the passenger timetable. There are only about half a dozen long distance trains in South Africa today. And I imagine Dayar and Kimberley are fairly desolate places. There aren't any advertised passenger trains to Namibia. The only train that goes up there is the Rovos Rail luxury train. Now we're coming to the end of Reel 3. This is north of Kraankuil, where the road no longer follows the line.
This line is going where?
This is heading north to Kimberley. This is the same line. It's the same double track main line from Dayar to heading towards Kimberley and Johannesburg. And in part 4, which is yet to be worked on, you will see some spectacular sunlight scenes in the Bloemfontein area. Bloemfontein was the highlight of the whole trip, with other locomotive classes taken early morning and late afternoon in brilliant sunshine. So that's the end of Reel 3.